Welcome to the place where we inspire growth through powerful stories of transformation. I am your host and artist, Jessica James, and this is the I Am Power podcast. Welcome back. I have been itching to share this episode with you since the moment I had the opportunity to interview this week's guest. If you've been listening to the podcast long enough, then you know I love a good COVID pivot story. And while I do love a good COVID business pivot, I do want to take time to say, I think I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again if I haven't. There were a lot of things that happened during that time that has affected many of us for the rest of our lives. And I think it's really important that we never forget how we felt and what we went through and where we are now because of it. I know that I have personally grown from 2020 and the events that happened during that time. And I just want to say, let's hold on to those memories, even the hard ones, and let's continue to grow and move forward. And that's exactly what we're doing today with my guest, Malobi. In this episode, Malobi shares her personal experience with diversity, how it shaped her passions, and how it led her to create a business that helps others make positive change. In this episode, we discuss the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workspace and why it is important that everyone is treated fairly and represented. This episode is a powerful reminder of the impact that diversity can have on individuals and organizations and why it is important for all workplaces to prioritize it. So as always, if you are ready for a power-packed episode, let's listen in. You're so awesome. Thank you so much for being on with me today, Malobi. It's such an honor to have you here and share your incredible story. I got the opportunity to speak with you on the phone and really kind of like dive into it a little bit before we recorded. And I'm excited to share it with everyone because I always love a good like COVID pivot, business pivot. Like it's so awesome to hear. And you know, I think everyone's life journey, sometimes even if we don't realize it, it starts at it starts way before we realize it. And I think yours really did.
Absolutely.
Because with DEI Directive, you are the founder and CEO of a company that, and I don't feel like I'm going to give it enough justice when I say what you do. So you're going to tell me, you're going to tell everyone here in a minute exactly what it is. But you help companies ensure that they have diversity and inclusion in the workspace. And I think that is so cool. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you and have you introduce yourself and tell us your story. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sounds good. First of all, Jessica, it's so good to connect with you again. And thank you very much for having me on the show. I really love what you're doing, really helping women reach deep and pull that power because we all have it, right? We all have it. We can access it. But my name is Malobi Achike, and I'm the founder and CEO of DEI Directive. And for those of you that don't know, DEI is actually an industry term for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we essentially help organizations, specifically human resource and DEI professionals. So think chief diversity officers, director of diversity within organizations. We help them take the guesswork out of the DEI management process, right? And we do that by giving them real-time and comprehensive access to data. And with that, they're able to get really deep insights and make better decisions. And as a result of doing that, their decisions and their efforts can actually have real impact that can then be sustainable in the long run. So yes, it's a mouthful, but really it's a way of saying we help organizations transform their workplace so that it works for everyone. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. And we're doing it through data and technology.
Oh, I love it. So you have like real hardcore, like sometimes we need to see that, and you offer that ability, and I think that's awesome. So
yes,
this is fairly new for you, right? You had a big career shift recently. We mentioned COVID earlier, but tell me how this happened for you. And you're not you grew up in very diverse. So tell me about let's start there. Let's start at the very beginning.
From the very beginning, where were you born, Malobi?
Yeah, tell me your history.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually born in Nigeria. I'm the first of 4 children, well, 5 children, but we lost my immediate junior sister when I was around 9. And then when I was around 12, 13, my family actually moved from Nigeria to Malaysia. And when we got to Malaysia, I ended up going to international schools. It wasn't really planned that way. My parents got there They didn't realize that the lingua franca, the common language in the country, was not English, right? And so they went to register for school, and surprise, they cannot understand the language.
Oh my goodness.
And so they quickly had to figure out, what to do. They obviously didn't want us to fall behind in education, and had to sort of like quickly rally and figure out something to put us in international schools. And those schools were really expensive, right? And they just did not budget for that. So that was a whole stressful situation. But beyond that, though, I think when I look back at that time, one of the things that I think is just, I didn't realize it when I was living it, but looking back, I am so appreciative because going to that school afforded me the opportunity to be in the same space with pretty much students from every corner of the world, right? Every corner. Yeah. So, every continent, we had a student, almost every country. So even that was, kind of going from a homogeneous society, like Nigeria is pretty much 100% Black population, right? And going to the school where you had just immense diversity. And obviously that experience would ultimately be that, spark that really started my interest
I'm getting
and excitement.
Cold chills already.
And ultimately led me to the job that I'm doing now. But fast forward, actually, after, my stint in Malaysia, I was there for about 7 years, so almost 10 years. And then I moved to Minnesota. So I moved to Minnesota, went to law school, got my JD, and I went into, private practice for a short period of time. And just really felt like, the business world was calling me, and I really wanted to, I was just craving change, and I wanted to change in a massive way. So I ended up actually transitioning. So still within legal field, but legal technology, and ended up working for an industry leader in that space for about 10 years.
Wow.
And in that time, over 10 years, actually. So in that time, I did a variety of roles. And obviously, one of the things I did was just like naturally gravitated towards the DEI initiatives of the organization. Again, not making the connection, but I was just drawn to that work, and I just did it. And I devoted my free time, volunteered for those types of initiatives. But fast forward over the last couple of years, with that organization, I just, kind of just feeling like something was amiss somewhere along the line. I had lost a connection to my passion and doing work that I felt had real impact. So I was kind of searching over the last few years. Now, fast forward to May 2020, the pandemic really was what spurred my decision to finally take the leap, because I wanted to. There was a little bit of fear, right, of the unknown, uncertainty. But with the pandemic, I have 2 young children. Our nanny, who was very pregnant at the time, had to actually stop coming to the house because her doctor advised her to stay home, right? Because this, again, early pandemic, we really didn't know anything. So there was a lot of fear. So here I was with my husband, 2 incredibly demanding careers. Back-to-back meetings. And these are meetings you're leading. So I did not have the luxury to just be a fly on the wall.
Right.
And I had 2 young children. My son was 5.5 at the time. My daughter, 2, 3. And they were pretty much running around the house unsupervised. It was crazy town. It was madhouse in my house, it was ridiculous. And my son was doing virtual schooling. So it's like 5-year-old, hey, be disciplined and sit in front of the computer and listen. It was not happening. So I would find myself with like a minute and a half in between meetings. I would run all the way down to my basement, run all the way up. And by the time I get to my desk, I'm balled over. I'm just thinking, one day I'm going to not make it here. I'm just going to drop dead.
Yeah.
And that was when my husband and I knew something had to change. And I kind of put in my 2 weeks notice at my job. I did that, and within the week that I did that, George Floyd happened.
Right.
And again, I didn't connect these dots back then, but looking back, like, wow, the timing of it, because the fact that I was on 2 weeks notice, I was winding down. So my calendar was clear, and I could actually take in what was happening, and I was so affected by it. And for me, the most significant day, obviously the day that he was murdered, that was just horrible. It was horrific. But the Tuesday after, if you remember what happened, it was Blackout Tuesday, when organizations, they changed their social media tiles to the Black tiles. It was incredible to sort of have that unification around organizations across industry as far as like, okay, something needs to change. However, though, for me, right, having been on the other side, I knew that that was a very shallow showing of support, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, as an organization, we have the capability, we have the power, we have the audience, we have the network connections to do more, and I felt like they could do more. And that was how.
Yeah, like, okay, we've seen, you recognize this, now what are we going to do about it?
Exactly. Yeah. And so for me, that was essentially my aha moment, right? My light bulb moment where I was like, there it is, right? I can help organizations do more than just the black tile. I can help them actually, utilize data and metrics to be very intentional and proactive in making changes and organizing within their organizations and actually having those efforts be impactful. And then obviously if we do that, then that trickles down to the employees, right? That trickles down to the community, etc. So that was how DEI Directive was born.
Oh my gosh.
Very long story. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's incredible. I love it. I mean, oh my gosh. Yeah. It's such a topic that it's one of those things when we experience, monumental things that happen in history and we sit with it for a while and then it just seems like sometimes it goes away. Like it's in that moment, everyone's upset, we're in that moment and feeling it. And then it seems like it happens a lot that it goes away, it flutters away. If it's not, in the forefront of our mind all the time, it can, move back here and then things slip through the crack and then we go back into old habits. And so I think it's incredible what you're doing. Tell me exactly, because I'm not familiar with this. When did this start to become an actual thing where employers were like, okay, we need to make sure that we have inclusion in our business? Was there like a movement that happened like years ago, or is this something that we've just progressively see happen over time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So DEI has actually been something that organizations have been trying to figure out for decades, right?
Okay.
You can trace it even before the civil rights movement, but let's say around the civil rights movement was when I think the vision was pretty clear and there was sort of like a mass awareness of kind of like DEI initiatives and the importance of it.
Yeah.
But obviously, since that time, we're talking like 6 decades. Since that, my math is really bad, so that
it's
might
okay.
Not be
if you would ask me to do a math problem right now, I'd be like, no thanks, Malobi.
I know. I'm like, wait, was that 30 decades for whatever?
Because then it makes me feel older when I think about it. So we don't think about it like that.
I know we don't. We won't go there. But anyway, so since that time, organizations have actually done DEI initiatives. Obviously, they've all kind of like come under different names. Initially, it was diversity. And then it was D&I, and now it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some people, diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, mental health. So there are different iterations of it, but ultimately the goal is largely similar, right? And so organizations have actually been organizing and working around this, for decades. Now, obviously, if you actually look at the measurable impact, right, or actual real impact, not a lot of people have anything that is worthy to write about, quite frankly, and that's a shame, right? And we believe that the reason for that is that the data piece and the measuring piece, the metrics piece, the accountability piece has just not been a part of the equation, right? So if you think about, like the famous saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, that is absolutely true. And if you think about in all facets of your life, if you wanted to get more healthy, what's the first thing you do? Well, what's my weight, right? Yeah. Or maybe measure whatever parts of your body you're trying to improve on. And then where am I trying to go? You define that, right? Yeah. Within an organizational context, if you think about revenue attainment, have you ever heard of an organization that goes, oh, you know what? This year we're going to sell a lot. And that's great. Right? Never happens. Because my definition of great and your definition of great could be largely different. So if we're really serious about having impact and actually driving change within our organization, the first thing is we've got to do an assessment, right? Sort of like a diagnosis of where we are, right? And actually, even before we do that, we need to actually understand why. Why is this important to us?
Yeah.
Are we doing it for shallow reasons? Because if you are, that's going to quickly be evident and your initiatives will not fail. They might have success in the short term, but long term, you're not really going to see the needle move. So you really have to get comfortable and get deep and clear about what the why is, right? And I really encourage organizations to really devise a DEI strategy that is in alignment with the larger organization's vision, mission, core values, right? Because when you do that, then what everybody is already sort of like mandated or tasked to do at work, as you're doing that, you're also working towards your DEI goal, right? So if you can sort of like find that commonality and a way to intertwine the two, you're more likely to have like success and impact. But after you've sort of done those definitions and gotten clear on sort of what the goal is and why we're doing this, then the next part is going to be absolutely to assess the status quo. And, you know, once you assess the status quo, then you want to sort of like define what's the goal, right? Where are we trying to get to? And how long do we want to get there? So saying, oh, I want to, you know, sell like $1 million.
Yeah.
Okay, great. But when though, right? So your interpretation could be, oh, okay, so long as I get to $1 million at some point. Somebody's interpretation could be get to $1 million by end of the year. Or, oh, that's a 2023 goal, right? So again, you have to put a timeline around that.
Yeah.
And once you take those steps, that actually really makes the process a lot easier for the organization, because now you have very concrete, measurable, realistic, attainable metrics that you can now align everybody in the organization, regardless of what they do. Like, this is your bit to help us get to this larger goal, right? So share that mission. So communication is key. And then actually spell out how each person within the organization what they can do on a day-to-day basis to help the organization, their team, the department get to this goal.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. Is this something that's just, I mean, like, it all makes sense to me. Like, you know, you think that this would be something naturally that just happens, that there shouldn't even have to be, you know, things, checks and balances in place to make sure that companies are doing what we should be doing as human beings. But here we are.
Yeah.
Is this something that is for just like corporations or like small businesses too, you know, because ultimately, if someone's listening to this, I want them to understand like why they need to implement this type of practice into their facility. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's much more than just diversity as far as race, because it's this whole spectrum of, we just have to make sure
Absolutely.
everyone's being taken care of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you asked that question, Jessica, because it is not just an organizational imperative, right? This is something everybody should be doing.
Yeah.
Because the thing about diversity, DEI in general, when we think about it, the natural inclination is to sort of just think about the moral imperative is the right thing to do.
Right.
Of course, it's the right thing to do that the person next to me has access to the same opportunities, that they get paid the same for the same work, that they are able to apply for a job, and if they have the qualifications, be hired to that position, right?
Yeah.
Of course, all of that naturally makes sense as the right thing to do. However, though, and this is what I really like to focus on with organizations, there is a ton of study that actually demonstrates the business imperative for DEI. And what I mean by that is DEI is great for business. So even if, like, you know, we can have a debate about, well, whose morals? What are your morals, right?
Yeah.
They might not be aligned with mine. Maybe I think it's okay that I have an unfair advantage. Maybe I think, you know, I can think whatever I want. So outside of the moral imperative, though, there is a ton of studies by very reputable organizations. So we're talking McKinsey, talking Gartner, we're talking Deloitte, right? That really underscores how DEI actually helps organizations reach a higher level of revenue attainment. So DEI is great for business. And I can give you some of those numbers. Like a pretty common one is when people talk about organizations in the top quartile for race and ethnicity diversity actually outperform those in the bottom quartile by 36%.
Wow.
And keep in mind, a percentage point is not $1. It's not $5. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars potentially, right?
Yeah.
And then when you sort of like look at that through the lens of gender diversity, the advantage that those in the top quartile for gender diversity have over those in the bottom quartile is about 25%. So these are huge concrete numbers. And now you put that side to side to what we're seeing. I mean, this even this trend started happening before the pandemic. The workforce, the way they think about work and the type of work they want to do, and the values that the organization they work at should have, and how it's important to align with their values, and that they sort of like take a stand on social issues. That's been going on for a very, very long time.
Right.
And so a recent research showed that about 80% of actually employees want to work at organizations that prioritize DEI.
Yeah.
So those are pretty strong numbers and pretty strong and compelling reasons why organizations should care, even if obviously organizations, you know, in general, I mean, the purpose of an organization is to make money, right? So even if we're so tied to just that singular purpose, then, you know, these studies and research now allows you to tie that to DEI, right? And then if you start looking at what's happening with the workforce, specifically, now I'm talking specifically in the U.S., right? So in the U.S., the pandemic actually accelerated the rate of resignation or retirement, rather, of like baby boomers, right?
Yeah.
So baby boomers right now are retiring at the rate of about 10,000 per day. And who do you think is stepping up to replace those baby boomers? And mind you, those baby boomers are largely going to be like in, you know, higher level positions, so manager, leader positions. So they're retiring and they're getting replaced by, well, millennials and Gen Zs, right? And what's the makeup of millennials and Gen Z? Millennials are 44% non-white. Gen Zs are 48% non-white.
Wow.
Right?
I did not know those numbers. Yeah.
So if your organization doesn't start embracing DEI, especially now I'm talking specifically in the US, then you're really putting yourself in a position where it's really going to be difficult to be competitive as far as like your talent acquisition. And you're certainly not putting yourself in a position where you're able to attract the best and the brightest. And each of those things make you lose competitive edge. So just a ton of reason and a ton of research why there is a very strong business case to embrace this, and to embrace it now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but to do it now.
Don't miss the bus,
right?
Yeah.
So,
oh my gosh.
Exactly. Don't miss the bus.
Don't miss the bus. It's so interesting to me because I think even before we scheduled this opportunity to speak with each other, I watched some documentaries. I think one was on Hulu and one might have been Netflix. And it was about Abercrombie and Fitch. And then I want to say the Victoria's Secret documentary that came out recently.
That.
I know, okay.
On Hulu, yes.
Yeah. And so it was almost
fascinating, by the way.
It's so fascinating. I mean, you know, it's like one of the things that they talked about was, you know, like you had mentioned, millennials and Gen Zs are just like, we're not doing this. Like, this is not happening.
Yeah.
And so it's really incredible to see this movement of people stepping up. And especially when, you know, if you haven't watched the documentary on Abercrombie and Fitch, it was very much, I mean, it was very disturbing to find out like their criteria of hiring people. Basically, like if you weren't their version of pretty, if you didn't weigh a certain amount, you know, you had to have a certain body type. Definitely, if you were white, you were put in the front. You got the best hours.
Yeah.
If you were of any sort of ethnicity, you got the crappy hours, or you were put in the back. And so when people found out about this, they were like, we're not doing this. This is not. And so they, this whole, you hear a lot about cancel culture. So they pretty much like canceled this $1 billion company because they're like, we're not allowing this to happen in our time. And then with, the book Victoria's Secret. And so where I'm getting at with this whole situation is that these companies, it was brought to their attention and they didn't change it. They didn't fix the problem, or they kind of fixed the problem and they didn't actually fix the problem. And then they missed the bus, and then they're paying the price now because I don't want to shop at a company. I don't want to give a company my money, my hard-earned money that doesn't align with my standards. And so I think it's just don't miss the bus. We're just telling you, don't miss the bus.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm so glad that you brought up those examples, because I was fascinated actually by that documentary. I mean, naturally, right?
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, like, there's a huge lesson there. And even when you look beyond the companies that were featured in that documentary, right? And you look, just think about what's happened over the past couple of decades, right? So in that documentary specifically, it was Victoria's Secret and their unwillingness to change, even in the sort of like midst of the Me Too movement, right? So sort of like having that singular note and version of what a woman's body looks like. And then I know, the documentary talked about Fenty, Rihanna's organization, and how she launched and went the complete opposite way, right? I mean, you had diversity in race and ethnicity. You had diversity in body types. You had diversity with like features that, aren't traditionally, mainstream considered pretty. She featured all of those things, and in return, it was largely embraced by the public. Now, go back a decade or so ago, think about Blockbuster. Where's Blockbuster? Right? Blockbuster had the market, but streaming was starting to take on, and they did not change. They refused to change. They did not change, and as a result, they are obsolete. Think about Walkman, Sony Walkman. Remember Sony Walkman? I mean, I don't know how old you are.
I do.
Younger than me.
Yes, I do.
Well, that like Sony had pretty much market share, right, for that. And again, they did not evolve enough. And here comes the iPods, right?
The MP3 players, and then
thank you. Yes, I'm like, I've even forgotten.
iPod, you're right.
iPod, yeah. So here comes the iPod, and it was giving, the consumers what they're asking for. I think in the sort of like human capital organization, like workforce, environment, I feel like DEI is that version, right? There's a lot of engagement, like a 2020 or 2021 study showed that about 95% of executive CEOs were actively engaged in DEI. But I know that that's significantly dropped off. And I also know that a lot of organizations that made public statements and commitment to be very intentional and to actually make a change, concrete change with DEI, have since shifted their focus, right? And a lot of those commitments have not been met. And I would just implore that, organizations that will last and be here in a long time and really be able to optimize on talent, optimize on skill set, create a work culture that everybody wants to be a part of, are really those that take this seriously and act proactively.
So you think as an employee standpoint, because we're talking a lot about as an employer's standpoint and the importance of it, especially with COVID, again, I always, I've talked about this before, and again, a good COVID story. A lot of
I love a good COVID story.
I do. A lot of employees have, we all experienced a great shift during that time. So there's been a lot of employees who are like, I'm not going to work for a company that doesn't value me anymore. I'm not going to work, with wages being an issue. And, so we experienced a great, I'm trying to figure out the words I'm trying to say, but like almost a gap where, I was seeing on social media a lot of people are like, nobody wants to work anymore and da 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 da. And I'm like, I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I think it's weird just finally standing up for ourselves and saying, you know, I don't want to work for a place that doesn't value me as an employee, or I do feel uncomfortable in this work environment because, you know, I feel like I'm not being treated equally. And so I'm not going to go and work at this place anymore. So, you know, from an employee standpoint, why is this important? You know, I know for obvious reasons, you know, but me being a white woman, it's a little bit different than someone who, you know, is racially different from myself. So can you tell me the importance from an employee standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like especially post-COVID, because we saw a spike in that type of activity and thinking, you know, post-COVID, right? I think, you know, all of us can kind of think about how we felt, especially at the first year of COVID. There was a lot of fear. And I know personally, there were a couple of times I looked at my husband and I was like, is the world like ending?
Yeah, like,
you know,
what's
like
going
those
on?
early days where, like really I mean, because we've never experienced anything like this. I mean, it was kind of like a horror movie, right? In those early days, we would go for a walk and there would be no cars, nobody.
Oh my gosh, it was so
you know,
eerie.
so that was very, that was so creepy and just so weird. But I think, and then of course you're hearing in the news of all these people dying, you know, the elderly, young children. I mean, everybody really. And so I think when you are sort of like faced to really think and come to terms with your mortality, and, you know, in this particular case, we had absolutely no control. There was no cure. There was no end in sight. We didn't even know at the time, like how you contracted, how to keep yourself safe. So like a lot was beyond our control. And the only thing really that we had at the time, at least for most of us, was family. And so, you know, so spending time with family, reconnecting with what most of us really believe, but have, you know, lost sight of over the years, just kind of going through the hamster wheel of I wake up, I go to work, you know, it disrupted essentially our routine. And so we're able to, you know, be a little bit more introspective and just reassess what our values are, what matters. And I think for most people, the answer is, you know, at the end of the day, when I'm sitting on my deathbed, not to get very morbid, but when I'm sitting on my deathbed, you know, like the conversation I'm having with myself is, oh, yeah, I really made all that money, or, whoa, I was really in the office the most. Like none of that stuff ultimately matters, right? It's the quality of life we've had, the experiences we've had with people around us, family, friends, and people we encounter. That's ultimately what matters. And I think it's with that mindset that people are able to really reassess their commitment to work. Now, like you, I don't like hearing, you know, professionals say nobody wants to work, because I don't actually believe that that's true. It's almost sort of like a knee-jerk defense mechanism instead of taking ownership of how on the organizational side, perhaps on an organizational level, we've also lost sight of the fact that, you know, our workforce, our employees, really, they're your first customers, right? So organizations, you know, focus a lot on customers and treating your customers well, keeping them happy. Well, you need to do that for your workforce and then your customers, exactly in that order. Because if you don't treat your employees right, who's interacting with your customers? Do you think that some of the, you know, some of the resentment or some of the angst they feel about the work, do you not think that that is going to translate into the customer experience? It absolutely does, right? And I will tell you, like, I'm very involved with the, HR, the SHRM organization. And so this is basically, we have like monthly meetings. And in these meetings is basically, you know, human resource professionals, chief diversity officers, people that are really tasked or have the mandate within organizations to make changes around DEI. So we're talking like hiring strategies, all of that. And, you know, I will tell you that there is definitely a recognition that there's a shift. I mean, everybody sees it, right? I mean, where you go into an interview and before you even get started, someone goes, oh, just so you know, So these are the things that I like. And does your organization do that, or does it do this? Because if it doesn't, then
I'm not.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, I mean, that is unheard of.
Oh my
that
gosh,
has never, ever happened before. And it's shocking just to see how far we've come, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think, it's a fantastic and tremendous opportunity for organizations to really recognize the opportunity to take the lead and set themselves apart and to gain that competitive edge.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I want to work at this place because of this. And so, as opposed, because, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because there has been this dynamic shift, and with social media being the way that it is, you get to see a lot of that in the, people talking about, this is how you would answer an email, or when you go to apply for a job, make it to where they want to hire you as an employee. Like, why should they hire you as a benefit to them? Because, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was, I really hope I can get this job. I got to make these people believe that I'm the right person. So it's this healthy dynamic that I feel like if both parties work well, we can move into this whole new era of, the experience of the worker and the employer, and make it a great relationship. Honestly, that's really what I think a lot of it needs to boil down to, is just having a great relationship. And so that, like you mentioned, so that your customers' relationship with your employees, and then your employees, it's, let's all just be happy and do great things together.
Exactly. Yeah. And your employees are also more engaged. And if they're more engaged, they're more productive.
Yeah.
So think about, productivity. Instead of doing the work in like 10 hours, if I'm productive and focused, I can do it maybe in 6 hours.
Yeah.
And ultimately, everybody wins in that situation. So there's just a lot of, we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just compelling reasons why, organizations should be proactive and figure it out how to navigate this and to actually lead the change.
Most definitely.
In this area, for sure.
I like the steps that we're taking. That's awesome. So if someone owns a business, or a corporation, small business, and they're like, I like what she's saying. I need to make sure that this is going, that this is happening in my, this matters to me. I think this matters to my customers and my employees. What are some steps that someone can take to make sure they're going in this right direction?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? So there's a lot of things to do. The first thing is obviously, like, the leadership has to be on board, right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be internal dialogue, and sort of like building of consensus within the organization, because a lot of times you have, employees or individual contributors that, are really passionate about this and really want to lead the change within an organization. But if the leadership team is not bought in, the people that actually make the ultimate decision as far as like what the strategy for the organization and the direction the organization should go, if they're not bought in, the people writing the check, right? And signing off on all of that, if they're not bought in, then it's, it's a tough road to travel.
Yeah.
And honestly, almost near impossible.
Yeah.
Which, it's difficult to say, but it's true. But with that said, though, there are levels to this thing, right? There are different levels of impacts that we can have. So I would encourage individuals that are listening to this podcast or have been pondering this and trying to figure out what they can do within their sphere of influence to get involved anyway.
Yeah.
Right? To get involved anyway. The leaders might not be on board now, but do not underestimate the power you have when you put your mind to it and have a clear vision and are strategic with engaging the right players within your organization, externally as well, to really start moving that giant ball of change, right? So I would definitely say get involved. When I was in a corporate environment, I was very involved with I led the, ESG groups, employee groups. So I was the chair of the women, group within my organization, the community outreach group. I was also the co-chair of the Black Employee Network on a global scale, right? So, so through those activities, you're able to, again, you're not necessarily deciding or determining the larger strategy for the organization, but you have influence, right? You're able to make little tiny impacts that hopefully over a period of time adds up, and could just be the thing that the organization needs to sort of like, push it into action.
I love that you're saying that, because a lot of times we do feel like, oh, well, it's just me. Like, what can I do to make a difference? And like you said, like that one person, and then planting those seeds, can help
absolutely
grow flowers all around and be the change that you want to see. So,
exactly.
Oh my
gosh. And
Jessica,
in addition to that, I would also say, like, just like with life as you get older, like one thing that's constant is change. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly learning. Nobody knows everything.
Right.
Doesn't matter like where you sit in the hierarchy as far as like the career world. Nobody knows everything. And so I would say a part of that for individuals listening is also just like continue to do your own self-growth, continue to educate yourself, continue to be aware of your blind spots, right? So like talking about unconscious bias and how you naturally just perceive those around you. Just because you have some biases, unconscious biases, doesn't mean you're a bad person. That's literally like how our brain works, right? So that when there's a tiger like launching at us, we're not thinking, oh, there's a tiger, move left foot, move right foot, do it at the speed, like you just like run, right? You move. And so it's really that same sort of like fast thinking, capability that also presents itself when it comes to unconscious bias. And we make decisions that ultimately can help support or create an environment where some of these things that we want to see change is fostered. And so we also just need to be able to continue to do our work to make sure that we're, just sort of like educating ourselves and doing, optimizing our capability to be more impactful in this area.
Most definitely. Just like, and what I'm getting from that is just being aware and, that recognition of wanting to be, changed. And that's the biggest part, instead of just, walking with blinders on and just, seeing what's right in front of you. When we take those blinders off and start to become aware of the world around us, beautiful things happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's such great advice, honestly, because I know I find myself getting frustrated, and I'm just like, you sometimes want to just take the world and like shake it and say, what's going on. But it takes multiple people with the same vision coming together to see and be that change that we want. And what you're doing is definitely that. I mean, it's such an incredible thing. I honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I had no idea that this even existed. So I'm just like over here like, this is incredible. Oh my gosh. It's just going to keep getting better and better. And the fact that so many companies are open to this and are jumping on this and wanting to be a part of the change that we so desperately need. We're moving in that direction. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we're, one foot in front of the other. And that's really, how it happens. Oh my gosh. And so again, if anybody that's listening to this is like, I need to do this, they can contact you, because you can just come in. If they're like, I don't have any idea where to start, I don't even know if we're doing things right, like they can just call you and you can come right in and be like, all right, we're going to assess and we're going to find out what's going on, where the problems are, and we're going to fix it and help you guys fix it and grow ultimately, right? Is that what we need to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it starts with basically a conversation. So like a recognition or will to do something. You don't have to have, even like a deep understanding of what has been done so far, or even have clarity on where you want to go, right? You just know that you want to do something. And there is, like appetite to explore that at least within the organization. That's literally where you need to be. And then reach out. We would have a conversation. And part of that will be just really understanding again, kind of why you reached out and sort of like a rough understanding of what you were hoping to get out of it and where you would like to see things go within your organization. And we will sort of like just massage out those details from that call. But absolutely happy to engage in a conversation with anybody that is,
most
thinking
definitely
of leading this or doing something within their organization.
Awesome, for sure. And I will make sure that I link Malobi's website and her contact information in the show notes so that if anyone's like, okay, this is what we're going to do, they can just jump right into that space and connect directly with you. I do have one question that I like to ask all of my guests. So if you don't mind, I want to wrap up the show with that one. We like to talk about power on the podcast and not thinking of that as a bad thing. How would you describe, or what would you think of the type of power that it is that you try to step into every day?
Oh, wow. What type of, you may have just stumped me, Jessica.
Yeah. What is your power?
What type of power?
Yeah. What is your power?
Yeah. Honestly, for me, I think, the last few years has really been years of growth. And I think I shared this with you when you and I connected on the phone like a few weeks ago, because I actually always wanted to sort of like own my own business, but I thought I would be there in my 20s. And I realized I was terrified. I was afraid. I'm a perfectionist, right? And I'm somebody that is terrified of failure. And that fear of failing really held me back. Even when I made the decision we're moving forward, I would have days where I would wake up in complete panic. Like, oh my God, what did I just do? And then I'll hit up some people in my network. I'm like, I think I'm getting back in the job, and I'm going to search for jobs. And then like, and then within an hour it passes. And I'm like, no, stay the course. And, so for me, I think it's really ultimately knowing my why. And that would be essentially my family, right? My family is a huge why for me. So recognizing that, knowing that, and then also finding what I'm passionate about. So, I'm a bit of a workaholic. It's genetic. My dad is a notorious workaholic. And so, my sister. But, for me, I feel like, so when I look back in my corporate life and the jobs I've had in the past, I've always worked, like well below as far as the hours I put in, right? The average. That's always been me. But I can tell you with this role, I'm working way more than ever. I know it sounds pretty bad as where is she going with this?
Right.
But it's my passion. And so it does not feel like work. Like I enjoy it,
it's fulfilling.
I enjoy, it's so fulfilling. And I mean, I tell my husband so many times, like, oh my gosh, like I'm so glad, as terrified as I was. And, as much as I had some, sort of like panicked moments, I had friends on conference call, like, oh my God, the world is falling apart. And I cried, on so many days because I felt like for someone that liked to be in control and liked to really sort of like take charge, I felt out of control for quite a bit of time. I knew I needed a change and just had no clue where to start. And, so I would say, honestly, is just connecting to why just your why in general, and then finding the thing you're passionate about. I really think, I'm so glad that I can stand here today and say that I found it. And I definitely recommend it.
Oh my gosh, so awesome. You've just given me, like, I'm thinking about my own things and I've got going on. I'm like trying to figure out what direction I want to go, and you're just like, stay the course and believe in yourself, and you're capable of doing the things that you want to do. So amazing.
Absolutely.
Such an incredible story.
And that doesn't mean it's not hard.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not hard. Like it's very hard, and it's normal to question even that commitment at times, right? But again, stay the course, right? Stay the course.
I love it. Such great information and empowerment that you have given us today. And then, of course, the things that you're doing is just, I'm almost speechless. Like my brain's just going like this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited to see what the future holds for you and for all these businesses that are taking the initiative to be the change that we need. But thank you, Malobi, so much for being on and sharing your incredible story with us. It was an honor to talk to you today.
Of course. Thank you, Jessica. I really enjoyed our conversation and appreciate so much what you're doing and what you're putting out into the world. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you all for supporting us with your listens today. I want to thank my guests again so much for sharing their powerful story of transformation with us. If you would like to connect with them, I have linked all of their information in the show notes below for you. If you personally felt connected to the story and you would like to see the art that goes along with it, you can do so on our website at iampower.club. You can also pick up a limited edition print copy of that as your own reminder to step into your power on our website. All of the art sales go to support the podcast and keep us moving forward to bringing you powerful stories each and every week. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at I Am Power Club, YouTube at Jessica James. If you liked this episode and found value in it, please let us know by giving us a like and sharing us with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss next week's episode of I Am Power. See you then.